Hello and welcome back to Fly to Freedom. Today I'm joined by Dr. Russell Kennedy, widely known as the Anxiety MD. Dr. Kennedy is a medical doctor, neuroscientist, and developmental psychology expert. But what makes him so powerful in this space is that he isn't just coming at anxiety from a clinical standpoint. He's lived it. After struggling with severe anxiety himself, he found that the usual treatments didn't get him very far. That led him to explore a whole different way of understanding anxiety, not just as a mental loop, but as an alarm system in the body. He's the author of the best-selling book Anxiety RX and host of the Anxiety RX podcast, and I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Dr. Kennedy.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on the podcast.
Of course. Thanks.
And huge welcome.
Thank you for that.
Can you tell us what you would define anxiety as?
It's a tough one because there are so many different iterations of anxiety. I think anxiety, the big mistake people make is that they believe it's one thing. They believe it comes from the mind. It's an overactive mind, and they have to fix it with things that calm the mind or thoughts that are pleasant or are different than their normal worries. I believe that anxiety is two things. It's the thoughts of the mind, the warnings, what ifs, worst case scenarios your mind comes up with. But it's also this state of alarm that's held in your body that usually came from childhood. That's for the developmental psychology part of it. So if you experience a trauma or something that's too much to bear as a child, and it's not repaired at the time by a parent or caregiver or whatever, that energy still lives in you. It's like the energy of the law of thermodynamics. Energy can't be created nor destroyed, only changed in form. So that energy gets stored in your body as this state of alarm. And that state of alarm is actually what dictates what you think. So it's your body that dictates your mind rather than your mind dictates your body. Of course, it's both. But I think in our society, we believe that the mind is all powerful and the mind is actually controlling the body, when really it's the body controlling the mind. And because we're much better at expressing words than we are feelings, we attribute anxiety to the mind when really it's coming from the body. So if you're just treating your anxiety by going to talk therapy or trying to change your thoughts, you're really not getting at the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is this alarm state, this energy state of activation in your body that's been there probably since you were a child. And then we chase our tails trying to fix our thoughts when really the problem, the main root cause of anxiety is this alarm that's held inside of our bodies.
So we often think that we should be able to control our thoughts. We can use all these positive affirmations and do all the mindfulness and stuff. But what you're saying is it's a feeling problem more than a thinking problem.
Yes. Yeah, I like to say that anxiety is a feeling problem that thinks more than it is a thinking problem that feels.
I honestly believe the same thing for eating disorders.
Probably, yeah.
Talking about that, would you say that a lot of coping mechanisms like eating disorders are a way of coping with that deep anxiety that probably stems from childhood?
Absolutely. Yeah. In most cases, I think that's true. We can, inherit trauma from our parents and grandparents and farther back in our ancestors. There's something called inherited family trauma that we're starting to see more and more scientifically and clinically, specifically Rachel Yehuda's work out of Mount Sinai in New York, just showing that children of Holocaust survivors have a much higher rate of anxiety, depression, eating disorders than the general population. So though the children weren't exposed to the Holocaust, but their parents were, and the parents internalized that alarm, and that got passed down to them. There's a number of theories as to why that gets passed down, whether it's genetic or genetic modifiers or whatever. We really don't know yet, but there certainly seems to be a correlation between anxious parents, parents that had trauma, and kids that have trauma. So it is one of those things that I think some people show up with anxiety, some people show up with depression, some people show up with eating disorders, But it all comes from this alarm, typically that occurred in childhood. There's something that was too much for us to bear. Overbearing mother, father that was abusive. All these things create this alarm in our system. And to soothe the alarm, we use different things. So some people may go into overthinking, over worrying. They become anxious. Some people may go into self-referential negative thoughts about themselves because that's what they were told when they were younger, leads into depression. Some people get soothed by food, which we all do to some extent. So that becomes a way of sort of putting a blanket over this alarm temporarily. And it does work. Like that's the thing. It does work initially, but then it loses its ability to soothe. So you have to do more and more and more of it. I'm not telling you anything you don't know to get the same kind of distraction that you would from just grounding yourself in your body and staying with it. So all these things typically are a reaction, a self-medication of the alarm. And it appears to work initially. Worry appears to work initially because it distracts us into our head and away from this alarm in our body. And I think the same thing is true for eating disorders. I think it distracts us. It gives us something to focus on that that sort of detours us away from that underlying pain, abuse, abandonment, loss, neglect, bullying that we don't want to feel.
Absolutely. It's like the brain, you have an anxious thought, you have a feeling, and your brain is like, here's something you can do. Here's a plan. You can restrict your food. You can blame it on the size of your body, and that distracts you from the feeling that you're feeling. It gives
Yes.
you something that you feel you can control
Right. Yeah, it's like
because
that. It's like a t-shirt that says, I'm in my own little world, but it's okay. They know me here.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and we can't control our feelings.
No, no. I mean, you can modify your body state doing some breathing techniques, putting your hand on your chest, feeling your feet on the floor, grounding yourself will give you the best, platform to ease difficult emotions and calm your body in general, but you can't actually say, I don't want to feel anxiety anymore. And if we did that, we would have no anxiety because we'd just be able to go, I don't want to feel this anymore, and it would be gone. And it just doesn't work that way. And anxiety is modified by worry. So worry is the thing that we use to distract us from the pain. In eating disorders, food is one of the things that we use to distract us from the pain. And also controlling things that we can't control. So when we try and control things, there is a sense that, oh, I can control this, so I can control the painful feeling as well. And in a way, it kind of crosses over, it kind of couples that way is when we feel one pain, we can kind of avoid another. And I think this is one of the things where I don't know if you have a lot of cold plunges in the UK right now, but
Have a lot of what? Sorry?
cold plunges where people
Oh, cold
fill on
plunges.
yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
people fill up an ice bath or fill a bath with cold water and they lie in it or, and initially when you get into a cold plunge, your body says, get out, get out, get out, get out. And what you do is you kind of go, no, I'm going to stay in this. I'm going to stay in this dysfunction. I'm going to stay in this pain. And then you teach yourself to be able to handle pain. That works for you and against you. So in anorexia, you teach yourself how to handle the pain of hunger because it's seen as an easier pain. The brain, the subconscious parts of the brain sees that hunger as an easier pain to tolerate than say going back and addressing the abuse that happened to you when you were younger. So in a way, we kind of double down on that one area because although it's painful, it's a pain that we know. It's a familiar pain that we can create as opposed to this other elusive pain that we could never really process or metabolize when we were children. So we pick this one and double down on this one and are afraid to go back and address that one. So the anorexia gets worse, the anxiety gets worse, the depression gets worse as a way of modifying the state of alarm that got put into us when we were younger.
And the state of alarm that we are modifying, that we're putting the blanket over with
Yeah.
these coping strategies, that doesn't go away, does it?
Well, it can if you do the right thing. So a lot of it is being able to, how do I soothe myself in my own body? I listened to one of your podcasts on self-care. Like, how do you soothe yourself in your own body? How do you become more comfortable in your own skin? Those things create the platform for being able to tolerate the uncomfortable parts of your body. So if your body is always this source of pain, you're not going to want to spend much time in your body. So what happens with worriers is they go up into their heads and they worry and they worry and to avoid this alarm in their body. So it's this ability to kind of dip your toe into the old trauma, to find what's there, find the sensation. Where do you feel the alarm in your body? This is a lot of my work with people is, where do you feel the alarm? And I will take them like, what's a painful thing from your past? And I say, don't pick the worst painful thing of your life, but pick a pain, and they'll say, well, my dad got injured when I was, 12 and he spent some time in a wheelchair. He got better, but those 2 years that he was really incapacitated were really difficult on the family. It's like, okay, relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, close your eyes, take yourself back to that place. If it's okay, you have to titrate to make sure that people are okay reliving this particular thing. That's why I say, don't pick the first trauma of your life, and then sort of scan your body and see if there's a place of pressure or pain, or just some intensity in your sensation. And that's probably where the alarm is. And then I get people, okay, put your hand over that area, which for a lot of people is immediately soothing, because really that area, not to get too woo, is the child in us, the child that had to sort of offload this trauma. So it got offloaded out of the mind and into the body. And if we are careful and sensitive, we can find that alarm in the body. In me, it's in my solar plexus, and a lot of people, it's in their throat. Um, the people that I've dealt with eating issues, which haven't been many, but there's sort of a constant pattern. Often they'll have pain in their throat, like up in here. I often say, were you able to speak back to your parents? Were you able to express what you needed as a child? And 90% of them, no, they couldn't. So the energy is stuck here. It's stuck in that sort of fifth chakra area where, I'm not able to express myself. So the pain stays there. And then it's become so uncomfortable, we start developing different coping strategies to distract us, suppress the pain, medications, addictions, all these things come in to try and put a blanket over that alarm. Mhm. It only works for so long, but it does, you know, radical methods tend to work. They tend to supersede that original alarm, which gives us this false sense of security that we're on the right track. And then we double down on the coping strategy. In most worriers, it's worrying. Most anxiety people, it's worrying. And then that just it gets a life of its own. And then it just starts steamrolling us.
That's really interesting, especially what you said about the throat, because,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I've always
Okay.
felt.
Sure. Right.
And yeah, I couldn't express my needs as a child.
Yeah.
I couldn't speak back to my parents. I didn't have a voice.
Right.
And yeah, that's amazing. But the the coping strategies we employ, like anorexia,
Hmm.
they just mask that alarm, don't they? The alarm is still going off underneath.
And sometimes when you have a really difficult period in your life, the symptoms, the eating disorder symptoms get much worse because your brain learned that we can overcome this pain number one by using pain number two, which in anxious people is worrying, but in anorexia is restricting your food. So that pain is a pain that we know. As much as it's horrible and painful, it's familiar, and human beings equate familiarity with security. So this is why when you grow up in an environment of kind of chaos, that you will replicate that chaos in your adulthood. Freud called it the repetition compulsion. So whatever was normal for you as a child, familiar for you as a child, you will unconsciously and automatically try to replicate those same situations in your adult. And it's very powerful. This is why people, I was a family doctor for years. This is why people who had alcoholics for parents would marry alcoholics. and they knew they were alcoholics, and they would say, it's like, I know he's an alcoholic, but he's not as bad as this or whatever. It's like, it's like moth to a flame. You're old. Be very careful with the dysfunction when you grew up, because there is a strong unconscious urge to replicate that same dysfunction when you become an adult.
When you said about trauma in childhood, a lot of people think they had an okay childhood, but they're still exhibiting all this anxiety,
Yeah.
all this coping strategies. So how would you define trauma in childhood?
Anything that dysregulates the a nervous system so it doesn't go back to normal again. It doesn't go back to sort of a calm, peaceful state. It becomes a coping strategy. It becomes something that gets locked into the nervous system, where it doesn't fix itself automatically. And then that becomes the alarm. And that alarm tends to get worse over the course of time, because the alarm essentially is the younger version of you. So if the younger version of you isn't getting soothed, isn't getting acknowledged, isn't getting seen, heard, open to, understood, loved, and defended, that alarm will get worse. And then whatever the particular coping strategy that you have is, that's what you will employ. And then that becomes more and more ingrained. I said with worriers, it's worrying. With depression, it's sort of self-defeating thoughts, hopelessness. With eating disorders, it's restricting your eating. There's all these things. With OCD, it's going through these rituals to try and bypass this horrible feeling of alarm you felt as a child. So it's really going back and finding that child, because that pain of alarm in our bodies is a direct conduit to that younger version of us. And we can use that alarm, we can use that bodily sensation as a way of connecting with the child now in a way that we couldn't connect when we were children.
I think it's fascinating that it really does all boil back to our younger selves.
Usually.
So when we were children, we were pretty powerless and we relied on our parents, caregivers, etc., to meet our needs.
Yep.
So does it make a difference as to what type of child someone was? How can siblings, one be totally seemingly well
Yeah.
adjusted and not have any issues, and another one be really struggling?
Usually it's the one that develops the struggle is highly sensitive. So highly sensitive people, it's about 15 to 20% of the population. And it's a real risk factor for anxiety, depression, OCD, eating disorders. So if you are a sensitive child and you grow up in a loving, caring environment, you'll do fine. But if you're a sensitive child, highly sensitive person, and you grow up with trauma that's not repaired, chances are that's going to manifest as something like depression or anxiety or eating disorder or OCD. It just naturally comes out because the child is so sensitive. The alarm is so painful. They will literally do anything to try and escape that alarm. And because they don't have a lot of access to repair, it wasn't shown to them as children, they don't know how to fix it. So the only way they know how to fix it is with their coping strategy. And if their coping strategy is denying themselves food, then that will start taking over their life, because that becomes in their immediate in their brains, they get a little dopamine hit from restricting their food. In anxious people's brains, they get a little dopamine hit from worrying, because they believe that the worry is somehow keeping them safe, keeping them protected. So it's a very difficult pattern. Once that pattern gets coupled or ingrained in your nervous system, it's very difficult to extricate yourself from that. And specifically with talk therapy, because you're dealing with these, early developmental coping strategies that get, ground into the unconscious parts of us. And the unconscious parts of us don't understand language. Like the deeper limbic system, the emotional system in our brains doesn't understand language. Its language is feeling. So you can talk to that part all day and say, you're killing yourself by not eating. Doesn't get it, because you're not actually accessing the parts of the brain and the nervous system that hold those traumas, that hold those coping mechanisms in the first place. So you're not really getting, people will go into treatment for, alcohol abuse, anorexia, or whatever. And while they're in treatment, they'll usually do okay because they're surrounded by people. It's an environment where it's like everybody is going towards a common goal. But once they get out and they get back into their same old life again, it's very, very difficult to ignore that coping strategy because in their brains, it felt like it was working. It felt like it was numbing the pain, even though it was creating another pain. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yes, yes, it does. Do you think that um, having this childhood trauma and becoming a highly critical person is correlated?
Sure. Yeah, there's a part of our brain called the default mode network. So the default mode network was discovered in the early 2000s, and they had people in functional MRI scanners, and they were doing a test to see which brain areas are involved when you are focused on a task. So they would give them a math problem or a word to define or something like that. But they noticed that in between asking the questions, the brain would default into this sort of uh, consistent state among everyone, right? And they call that the default mode network. So the default mode network is kind of like the daydreaming part of your brain. It's kind of the part of your brain that kind of we go into when we're not actively doing something. Now, there's a part of that default mode network called the posterior cingulate cortex. The name doesn't matter. But the PCC is thought to be involved in self-referential thinking, what you think about yourself. So as a child, if you didn't have a very high opinion of yourself, if you didn't have a whole lot of repair, if you didn't have a whole lot of positive affirmation when you were a child, that posterior cingulate cortex, when you go into daydreaming mode, it starts replaying all those negative thoughts to you. You're never going to get anywhere. You're stupid. You're fat. All this stuff kicks in. So if that's our default mode and we're entering into that default mode 50, 100 times a day, that's going to be very difficult to deal with as a human being, especially if you're sensitive, right? So when we get into this place where we are told by ourselves, because we speak to ourselves in words, we speak to ourselves in language. When we are told this by ourselves multiple times a day, it becomes sort of it creates this echo chamber of our lives. So we're kind of trapped inside the echo chamber of this default mode network. So when we're actively doing something, we break free of the default mode network, which is why one of the reasons why when people are feeling anxious and they go for a walk, they start focusing on something different. They feel better. There's a number of reasons why nature helps, but that's one of them. It pulls you out of that loop that you created subconsciously when you were a child that relieves some of your pain. And unfortunately, when you default into that state, that self-negative state on a daily basis, hundreds of times a day, it creates this continuous sense of self. So if I am an anxious person, I have an eating disorder, I am depressed, it creates this echo chamber where wherever you look, you create more of what you've already created. Let me play that a little bit better. So when we tell ourselves these things over and over and over unconsciously, it doesn't really come into the sort of the conscious mind so much. We create this, we make the alarm worse for sure, which makes us search for our coping strategy even stronger. And then that pulls us out of the default mode a little bit, but we're always falling back into it. So the default mode, when we go into it, we start looking for our coping strategy. That could be worry. That could be restricting food. It could be a bunch of different things. So then the default mode starts becoming connected or coupled with this coping strategy. So when we fall into the default mode, then we also fall into our eating disorder. We fall into our anxiety. We fall into our depression as well. So if this happens over and over and over, and this is the echo chamber that we're in, we're going to create more and more of the coping strategy. And it's going to be harder and harder to move out of that because the default mode network, for the most part, is unconscious. It's below the level of the conscious level. So we can't really consciously get ourselves out of it. There are ways that we can do to make ourselves aware of the default mode and then move into the task positive network. going for a walk, um, dancing, doing something where you move your body moves you out of that default mode network. But again, you're probably going to slide right back into it. The other thing about the brain is whatever you focus on, you'll get more of that. You'll see more of that. You may have heard the story of what, someone buys a Toyota Elantra or whatever it is, or Nissan Elantra, and it's green. And then all of a sudden they see their same car all over the place. Whereas before just went by. So whatever you focus on in your brain will see more of that, but it will also ignore the positive. So it will see the negative. It will preferentially look for the negative. And then if there is anything positive, it tends to just let that go by. So this echo chamber in the default mode network creates our continuous sense of self. So if we think I am an anxious person, I am anorexic, I am this, then things that would go against that, you don't even see. Your brain doesn't even, the reticular activating system that develops salience, like what we pay attention to. We don't pay attention to the positive anymore. We pay attention to, we walk by the mirror and we think, oh, my stomach's sticking out a little more than it should, you know, that, and then we just create this more and more and more and more of this because the brain wants to know. It wants to know. It loves knowledge, even if it's negative knowledge. So whatever you focus on, you will get more of that, even though the amount of that in your world probably has stayed the same, but the salience of that becomes so much greater. So you pay so much more attention to this negative aspect of yourself in which that will manifest, as opposed to just sort of, okay, how can I move out of this default mode network? How can I move into a place where I can actually feel my body. I can actually feel my feet. I can actually feel my breath rather than automatically defaulting into this default mode network, which defaults you into your coping strategy, which in your case was eating disorder. In my case was worry.
So, whatever we are focusing on, whatever we're believing about ourselves,
Yeah.
our brain will use confirmation bias to keep
Yes.
finding evidence to prove that correct so that we are then stuck in this never ending loop.
Yeah. And ignore the positive too. So it's
Yeah.
it's like it's the same thing about, if you're I used to do stand-up comedy. So, 100 people in the room are laughing and one guy's in the corner with his arms folded. I'm paying attention to that one guy with his arms folded. That's just how we're wired from survival as human beings. So it's really it helps us learn. Like if we do love something, we'll see more of what we love and we'll focus on that. But we're wired for survival more than we are for connection. So we tend to, in this society, move towards our coping strategies and ingrain them deeper and deeper and deeper, as opposed to doing things that would actually improve our lives in the long term. Because, the restricting food, worrying is a dopamine hit in the short term, but you have to keep hitting it to keep getting that dopamine. Whereas longer connection, self-love, all this kind of stuff is a long-term connection, but it's slow. It's a slow onset, right? So our brain loved the quick hit. It loves the immediate gratification. So unfortunately, the immediate gratification is typically your coping strategy. And the long-term solution is typically a slow, for more positive sense that it's not as attracted to us because we don't feel good right away.
So, so when I was restricting massively, I not only got a dopamine hit when I restricted, I felt like it was something I was good at.
Yeah.
And that made me feel good because I felt like I was rubbish at everything else.
Right.
But I also got a lot of external validation. And lots of people were like, oh, I wish I had your willpower. And how can you not eat the chocolate and all this
Right.
sort of thing. So how does external validation play into this loop?
Well, I mean, it adds on to the positiveness of and I put positiveness in quotation marks there, of the dopamine as well. It reinforces, like in the back of your mind, you kind of know that you're hurting yourself, like it. But any evidence that sort of goes against that, you will swallow hook, line, and sinker because it does tend to allow you to to stay in that illusion. So if people are complimenting you, in the back of your mind that it's not good for you, or that, but consciously. But unconsciously, where most of us are driven from, there is that I will take any sort of evidence that this is helping me. The same addicts do the same thing. Addicts do the exact same thing. It's just like anytime that somebody say someone says I can't do an interview unless I have 3 drinks first. Right. So it is one of those things where you teach yourself that this helps you in the short term, and that's okay. You don't see in the long term because the pain was so great as a child, and the helplessness, as you pointed out earlier on, was so great as a child. You will take any port in a storm for this. So anything that makes you feel even remotely better tends to get exaggerated over the course of time. And it becomes a habit. And then we find ways of saying, well, this is okay. It's like smokers. They'll see something that says, oh, smokers have a lesser chance of developing Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's. Nicotine is neuroprotective. And then that will be enough reason for them not to quit smoking, even though they know smoking is hurting them. But they'll say, oh, well, there's a positive there. I'll just hold on to that. Even though smokers don't live long enough typically to get Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, they don't see the flaw in the logic. But anything that appears to substantiate your coping mechanism, even though it's negative, you'll tend to absorb that because you need everything you can to keep doing this thing that goes against you. And I think worriers know that worry is bad. People with depression know that making themselves feel terrible is not a good idea. So it is one of those things that our coping mechanisms are very delicate and but they work. And that's why they get ingrained. And it usually becomes from someone who is highly sensitive, experienced some significant alarm, and this is the only thing that's helped them.
So when they work, because they do work, these coping
Yeah.
mechanisms, eating disorders do help you feel like you're more in control. You do get validation. They do quieten the
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 alarms.
chatter in the brain, and they
Yeah.
do give you a dopamine hit, but obviously they are slowly killing you.
Yes. And until you get to a point, I had a friend who she was 5'10", 5'9", 5'10", and she got down to 86 pounds. Right? So and she's in the hospital and she's getting IVs, and then she told me the story about, one day she kind of woke up in the hospital with this IV in her arm, or this nurse was putting in an IV in her arm. And she said to herself, this person is actually trying to help me, and I'm actively trying to kill myself. So if this person wants to help me, why can't I help myself? Now, that sounds like a very sort of mundane example, but at that point changed her life. If someone else is there to help me, I can help myself. That was the message she gave herself. And now she's, hyper successful, 2 kids. They told her she'd never have kids. She has 2 great kids. It's it's very interesting to see how the thing switches. How did it switch for you, Julia? Like, what was the thing that made you go, I'm not doing this anymore?
Oh, it was kind of like a series of events. I had anorexia for 40 years,
Okay.
and what started the beginning of the end was my father died,
Okay.
and he had been a big force in my childhood, and a lot of the reason why I developed the coping strategies in the first place. And when he died, a lot of the feelings that I'd never felt and I'd not been allowed to feel as a
Sure.
child. Feeling was forbidden. It was
Well, you're
wrong.
British too. My mother's Scottish, right?
Absolutely.
She's from first
Yeah.
generation Glasgow. It's like stiff upper lip. You stuff it down, stuff it down, stuff it down.
Yes.
Have a cup of tea and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Keep calm and
Yeah,
carry on.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So when he died, the feelings started coming up, and it was like his death, like, broke the seal.
Mhm.
And I kind of viewed it to like all my life, I'd been blowing feelings into a balloon that had got bigger and
Mm.
bigger and bigger and bigger. And when he died, they started. coming out. There was no more space in the balloon. And they started coming out really quickly at almost like full force, like when you let a balloon go and it starts going all around the
Yeah,
room. And so I restricted more because I didn't want to feel them and I
of
didn't
course.
know how. I had no idea how to process a feeling. And the restricting didn't work. And so I
Right.
restricted more and more until I was getting to the point where my body was just not functioning. I was passing out all the time. My brain was not functioning at all because I was so malnourished.
Sure.
And I just decided, right, this is it. I am no use. I'm just going to take my life. I can't
Mhm.
stay here. Everyone will
Right,
be better off without me.
right.
Um, and I wrote notes and I'm really allergic to gin, which is a really random thing to be allergic to, but I have anaphylaxis to gin.
Really? Okay.
So I bought a bottle of gin
Okay.
and for some reason, I have no idea why, I went into the woods. I think it's because I didn't want any of my family to
Yeah.
find me. And I was just about to drink the gin, and somewhere in my head, I heard the voices of my children. And it wasn't, "Oh, mum, please don't do this."
Yeah.
It was, "How fucking dare you?
Mm.
How can you leave us with this?" And that stopped me. And then I realized it was do or die, and I either had to recover or I was gonna die
Yeah.
anyway from
Right.
malnutrition.
Right.
So I literally hit rock bottom.
Yeah, and it makes sense, when you go and this is true with just about anybody, like, if you have, anxiety and or depression or eating disorder or OCD, if something major happens in your life, that was a coping strategy, so it tends to magnify, and then it accentuates itself, and, if it's life-threatening, like, anorexia is, you get close to death. Like my friend, she got down to 86 pounds at 5'10". It's just it is one of those things that our brains are not that sophisticated in many ways, in that if something worked in the past, we tend to just keep doubling down on it. And then when it stops working, that's when suicidal thoughts come in because the only thing that helped you as a child is now gone. So now you're faced to feel what you felt as a child head on, and it was too much for you back then. As an adult, we have a lot more resource. We don't believe that we have a lot more resource because we're acting as children. We're acting from that child. But once we see this is the adult me, I do have some sense of control over this. I do have some ability to find that child and soothe them and see, I have this acronym called SHOULD, what you should have got when you were a child, which is to be seen, heard, open to, understood, loved, and defended.
Oh, I really like that.
Yeah, and then once you learn how to give that to yourself, because the alarm can act as a conduit, as we were saying earlier, to that younger version of you, because it's a feeling state. And that feeling state was ingrained in you when you were 7 years old or 10 years old or whatever it is. That feeling is still there. So you can use that feeling to contact the 7-year-old and go, okay, what do you need to say to me? I will hear you. I will open to you, understand you, love you, and defend you, which you probably didn't get back then. So it takes time, of course. It's a slow thing. So it's not, you don't feel better immediately, but you do have this sense that for the first time, sometimes, oh, I'm actually doing something that is good for me. I can do this. I can sort of see the child as this wounded part of me, but not all of me. Because when we were children and we went through trauma, it did feel like everything. It did. We had no agency. We had no way of getting out of that. So we had to dissociate. We dissociate into our minds. We develop coping strategies. Worry is a coping strategy. So is anorexia. And we will double down on those coping strategies until they stop working. And when they stop working, then we hit the crisis point, which either some people unfortunately do commit suicide, but others, have this internal strength that we tap into. It's like, you know what? I don't want to live like this anymore. I do have a feeling like I can work through this. And then sometimes we need a therapist if it's emotional, physical, sexual abuse, that kind of stuff. pretty much need a therapist for that. You're not going to heal that on your own. And then once you start seeing ways and this is what I do with people is I show them how they can heal their anxiety themselves. They are the healer. It's not me. It's not some supplement. It's not some fantastic psychiatrist. It's them. You are control. You have the control of healing yourself. And once people see that, then they can start taking control and start seeing, okay, I can look after that younger version of me. I get people to put a picture of themselves up on their bathroom mirror when they were, 5, 7 years old and just have
Oh,
idle
on my
chats with it.
phone.
Yeah. Just have idle chats with it as you go in and out. And then look at your own eyes, like talk to the child. That's very difficult for people to do. Very, very hard to look in the mirror in your own eyes and talk to the younger version of you. Very, very intense. And most 90% of people can't do it. It's just too intense for them, which I understand because you're talking directly into the emotional, unconscious parts of you that you pushed away for so long. But unless you turn around and face the dragon's always going to run your life.
What would you say to somebody who said, "But I'm angry with the younger version of me.
Yeah.
It should have been able to cope better. She should have adapted. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be like this."
Yeah, I guess it's just developing the sense of compassion for the child because anger is a secondary emotion. It's a protective emotion. So basically, what happens with anger is the adult is trying to protect himself by being angry at the child. The child is trying to protect himself by being angry at the world. So the whole anger thing just magnifies. It accentuates itself. So it's really as the adult in the situation going, who am I really angry at? Who caused the problem? Was it mom? Was it dad? Can I be angry at them? Because there's something in us as children that says, well, you can't be angry at mom or dad because mom or dad are responsible for your safety. And that gets ingrained to us in a very young age. But I'm here to tell you, you can get mad at your parents. You certainly can. You can certainly talk with the voice of that child saying, like you said, it's stuck in your throat. This was, this was, this was terrible for me when you did this, when you left me at the mall, when you constantly berated me about my weight, when you belittled me, when you hit me, you know, that's where the anger comes from. There's very few things a child does that that are worthy of being angry at them because they're children. They're acting out of the emotional part of their brain. It's automatic. I have two grandkids, 7 and 5, and I take them golfing or to the playground every Sunday. I see them during the week too, but every Sunday we go there and then we go to the what Tim Hortons, which is kind of like a kind of a casual restaurant. And they battle with each other, they elbow each other and that kind of thing. It's just like you just see the natural tendency, whatever they're feeling at the time, they will show you. They don't have that prefrontal cortex yet that says, hey, you've got to behave in this particular environment. You will see exactly what they're feeling because they can't hide it, but adults can hide it and stuff it down. So I don't think when we start seeing that the anger that we have towards that child is really the unexpressed anger that that child had towards typically a parent, then we have more compassion for that child.
Am I right in thinking that a child will always bring external blame internally? They will always blame themselves because if they were to say, well, actually, my parents are useless,
Right.
it's a danger to their
Of
survival.
course. Typically that's true. I think there are some children who are kind of old souls. They kind of like, I remember reading this book once about this like 7-year-old and his parents were alcoholics. And he was saying to himself, these people are crazy. So it wasn't like, well, he wasn't hating on him, but he was saying to himself, these people are crazy. And so I think in general, whenever the child's environment has conflict or pain, the child tends to blame themselves for that because the brain is trying to make sense of things, right? And if you can't blame the parent, the only way to make sense of that is, oh, it must be something I'm doing. If I could be more, better, different, do less of this, more of that, whatever, everything would be okay. That's the child's attitude towards getting this pain to stop. And sometimes getting that pain to stop is turning it internally where you feel you have control over that pain because it's stuck inside of you now. You have some control over it if you're creating it yourself. Now, that's a theory. I have no idea if we can, there's no way we can prove that, but it just happens so often. That old saying that when you abuse, neglect, and abandon a child, the child doesn't stop loving the parent, they stop loving themselves. Right.
Okay.
And then it's the confirmation bias after that, that it gets in the posterior cingulate and it starts reverberating in there. So the child starts seeing all the instances where they are this negative influence. And then that becomes part of their identity, part of their personality, part of their people pleasing. All this stuff kind of follows from that internal mistake of blaming themselves for the problem and trying to make sense of it by taking ownership of the pain, so that on some level they have some level of control of the pain because they've taken ownership of it. Now, I don't think they know that. I think it's more of a subconscious uh, coping strategy than anything else. But you certainly can't deny that children take on the stress and blame themselves for what's going on in their households,
And that creates the haunting feeling of not being good enough throughout your life.
which is the default mode network. If you're constantly at that posterior cingulate, that self-referential part of the default mode network in our brain, that daydreaming kind of everyday sense, the groove that our brain has says you're incompetent, or you can't do this, you're going to develop this victim mentality based on that because it's being presented to you a number of times a day. In a way, you are learning that you are not good enough.
So if I came to you before well, just when I decided I needed to recover,
Yeah.
and I said, "Help me. I I know I'm not good enough without this eating disorder. I know I'm no good at anything else. I've got all these worries, all this anxiety that's flying around my head." What would you do?
Well, I'd probably get you into that place in your throat. And we would go into, does it have a shape? Does it have a color? Is it superficial? Is it deep? Where is this alarm that's in your system? And really drill down into, what texture does it have? We really go into the deeper somatic sense, because there is a part of our brain called the insular cortex. And the insular cortex is highly focused on where we feel pain in our body. The anterior part deals with the emotional pain, and the posterior part deals with the physical pain. But a lot of times it's the same. When you have a breakup, you feel pain in your heart. There's that pain. It's mediated by both. So it's finding that area first, and then being able to use that area as a conduit, going back to the time in your childhood where all this started, and creating this compassionate connection to the child in you. But first, we sort of create some safety in your body, teach you some breathing techniques, teach you how to put your hand over this feeling of alarm, being able to stay with the pain as you bring these things up without reacting to it, just allowing it to be there, and just recognizing the compulsion to either restrict your food or worry or whatever it is, and just sort of seeing it as something that's outside of you, that was a coping strategy. Wasn't who you were, it was something that you had to become to survive. And then slowly we kind of tease those things apart, where you start becoming more comfortable with this feeling. It's never a comfortable feeling, but my goal is to try and create it into a feeling like, oh, you know what? I can tolerate this. I can see this as the younger version of me in pain, and be able to put my arms around them and connect with them and stay with them. Because then you're getting at the root of the problem. You're not saying, oh, well, here's your meal plan. Here's this, which doesn't work.
Doesn't.
It doesn't work. When I see these things for, eating disorders and, weigh-ins and meal plans and all that kind of stuff, I just cringe, because that's not the problem. That's that that's the symptom, so you can't treat the symptom and expect the cause to go away. It's basically, you have to treat the cause. So it's finding that anxiety, finding that alarm in your body first, creating a sense of safety around it, which sometimes takes time. And then once we create that foundation of safety, like, I don't like this feeling, but I can tolerate it. I can allow it to be there without immediately jumping into worry or jumping into my coping strategy. It's uncomfortable. I don't like it, but I can stay with it. And then the child kind of learns, okay, they're staying with me. They're not leaving me. I'm actually okay. My feelings are okay with them. This all sort of happens sort of over the course of time initially. And when you create that safety sense in the body first, then all the intellectual stuff comes in. Then you can start rationalizing and saying, okay, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it, and creating that. But you can't, what most therapies I think fail is you go in there and it's like, my husband snores and I want to divorce him. So you deal with, the snoring problem, or you deal with it. But that's not the problem. The problem is that you never got listened to by your parents. You don't get listened to by your husband. And this is the reason why you're manifesting in this particular way. So often in this society, and allopathic medicine is really bad for this, or good, and whichever way you want to look at it, as giving you medication to treat the symptom, but the underlying cause is still there. So one of the reasons I left allopathic medicine was because of that, just the frustration of, playing whack-a-mole with these diseases. A lot of people who believe they have Lyme disease don't have Lyme disease at all. They have childhood trauma, because childhood trauma presents in, you know, visual blurriness and skin reactions and, frequent urinary tract infection, like all this stuff that Lyme disease presents in the body with all these weird symptoms. So does childhood trauma. But people so badly want to know, they want a label. They say, well, I have Lyme disease. And most people with Lyme disease don't have Lyme disease, although they'll get really upset at you when you tell them they don't have it. What they have is childhood trauma that's manifesting as symptoms in their body. And because the childhood trauma manifests in these weird symptoms, they think that they have Lyme disease because they want an answer to it. But that's not it at all. So you have to deal with the childhood trauma. When you deal with childhood trauma, the symptoms go.
So once you've connected with your inner child and you've been working through, what happens to the alarm?
The alarm starts to fade. And people will often not notice the alarm fading so much as that, like, they'll come in and they'll see me as like, not worrying so much. Like my mother went into the hospital the other day, and normally I would be just beside myself. Like, is this, what are they going to find? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And I was kind of like, well, whatever happens, happens, and we'll deal with it. That's how people start knowing that they're healing from their anxiety. It's not that their alarm, because they're not really aware of that alarm so much in the first place. And because we're not aware of that alarm so much in the first place, we bite our tails chasing the thoughts of the mind when the mind is the symptom. It's not the underlying cause. So people will come back to me and they'll say, I'm just not as worried. I'm just not as fixated on all the possible ways I could control the outcome. I'm able to sort of sit with the discomfort and just allow it to be there. And that's what I was talking about earlier about the cold plunges, about, you go into this cold water, your brain is screaming at you to get out, but you're saying, no, I'm just going to stay with it. I'm just going to stay with this discomfort. And then over the course of time, you can stay in longer and longer and longer. And there's a direct analogy with alarm. Once you go into that alarm, even though when you first go into it, it's horribly painful, when you teach yourself that you can actually stay with it, it's uncomfortable, but you can stay with it. You're actually staying with the younger version of you and showing them that you are there for them, that you're not going to abandon them, that you can connect with them. And over the course of time, once that child feels safer because you've soothed their need for being seen, heard, open to, understood, and loved, then the alarm that they were creating starts to decline. And because the alarm is what's creating the warnings, what is worst case scenarios in your mind, those worries start decreasing because the fuel for them is fading. And then you start feeling like, oh, actually, I do have control over this situation. Because the worst thing about anxiety, and probably eating disorders too, is the feeling like you're powerless towards it. So once you
Yeah.
start seeing, oh, I actually do have power over this thing, my adult can take control of this in a very compassionate, benevolent way, then that almost sort of breaks the spell. And the child can kind of come out of that place knowing that they're held safe. And the adult says, I can do this now. I can do, I'm in charge. And I think this is sobriety, all this kind of thing. It's basically the adult in us deciding, hey, I'm not a victim to this anymore. It doesn't control me anymore. It's an urge. There's no doubt about that. But I now have some agency. And once you have agency over something, Because human beings can tolerate just about anything if they know it's going to end. So if they have the key to allowing it to end, they know that they're safe. It's like I used to have people come into my office with panic attacks. And I would give them a couple tablets of a benzodiazepine like Ativan or Xanax or whatever. And I'd say, when you have your panic attack, take this, right? So a lot of them resisted because they didn't like the idea of like, "Yeah, I've heard horrible things about this drug or whatever." I said, I'm only giving you 2 tablets. You're not going to get addicted on 2 tablets. So they have a panic attack, they take it. It would make them feel infinitely better. It would stop the panic attack. And after that, all they needed to know was that they had that tablet on their person and they could handle the panic attack, even if it was difficult, because they knew they had something that would stop it. But when you don't know you have something, you can stop it, which is what happens when we're children. We don't know when this is going to end. It's unbearable. And then we search for a coping strategy. And then we follow that coping strategy because it worked. So when we reverse engineer that, okay, we make the child feel safe through their alarm, through the alarm that's in our body today, then the child doesn't necessarily feel that they're out of control anymore. Even though this hurts, and even though there's an urge to do this particular activity, the adult can come in and go, you know what? I'm going to take care of you, child. We're not going to do this. We're going to do something else. We're going to connect to ourselves. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to, breathe. We're going to sit here with each other. And then when you feel like you've got some control over it, when you feel like you have some agency over what's happening to you can handle it because you know that you have the answer. You just have to practice the answer over the course of time. And the better you get at connecting with yourself, the faster your anxiety drops. And the more you start feeling control, the faster your anxiety drops as well. So it just becomes this virtuous cycle as opposed to the vicious cycle that we follow when we get hooked into our coping strategy.
So it's effectively probably the most effective coping strategy we can do is to find where the alarm is in our body, make that unfamiliar pain familiar by learning to tolerate
Yeah.
it for longer,
Yeah.
connecting with our inner child.
Yeah.
And then as we go through life, as soon as we start having the feelings, we know automatically what to do, and
Yeah.
we can start using that as our coping strategy.
Yes. So you supplant the negative coping strategy, the addictive coping strategy with a positive coping strategy, which is hard initially because you don't get that immediate dopamine hit from the connecting with your child. But after a while, you do start getting that. You do start feeling like you have a sense of control over. And then it takes time, but it works better than any other. Like I went through, 40 years of anxiety, just as you went through for 40 years of eating disorder. The only thing that helped me was finding this sort of somatic piece, delving into it, using neuroscience, the default mode network, amygdala, hippocampus, using all these things that I know. It's like, okay, how does this work? How can we rewire the system in the most effective, most efficient way possible in order to create long-term healing from this rather than, like a CBT program or whatever that makes you feel better for 3 to 6 months because you started, increasing this worry understanding in your brain, but it doesn't really get at the deeper cause. So once you get at the deeper cause of this, you start feeling, oh, I do have control over this. And when you feel like you have control over anxiety and anxiety doesn't control you anymore, one of the main forces behind driving you obsessively into worry is the fact that you're out of control. Once you feel control, you're not driven obsessively into worry anymore.
And connecting with compassion with your inner child means you're starting to speak to yourself compassionately, which then changes that default mode
Yeah.
network to a more compassionate base. And then because you're being kinder to yourself, you're generally feeling better about yourself.
Yeah. And the echo chamber you create now through the default mode network is one of positivity, one of looking at yourself in a positive light rather than, when you fall into the default mode, everything's negative and you have to fight to get your way out of it. Now the default mode network is, hey, I'm proud of you for not following this urge or doing that. We start developing this sense of ourselves, who we truly are before this trauma happened to us. We start really finding the inner sense of who we are because the child in us, as much as we push them away because they hold their pain, they also hold the very best parts of us. The best traits that we have come from that child. So it's really important to understand that the child must be celebrated not just, okay, I'm going to bring you back into the fold because I need to. Like, celebrate that child because the best parts of you come from that child.
It's creating a really beautiful loop instead of a
Yeah.
loop of pain.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed through my own healing, through huge amounts of inner child connection and bringing in the compassion and stuff, is how much more fun I've brought into my life, how much
Sure.
more play I've brought into my
Sure.
life. And I'm guessing that is directly from that child connection.
Yeah. Yeah. The play comes from the child in us too. And the funny thing about play is it activates the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system at the same time. So sympathetic is commonly known as fight or flight. Parasympathetic is commonly known as vagus nerve, rest and digest. So when we're in play, even if we're in sort of a football match, we're the sympathetic nervous system is activated because we're playing this game and we want to win. Yet the parasympathetic is that because I'm on this team and I want to help this team and we're together, so the other place that parasympathetic and sympathetic get activated at the same time is trauma. So when we're traumatized as children, it activates our fight or flight, but it also shuts us down too. So if you can access that same sort of emotional platform, like activation, co-activation of each system, we can bring up the trauma within that co-activation system within play, and play actually helps us rewire our brain. This is off the top of my head, but 10 times faster than doing it sort of sitting in a therapist's office, because we're creating the substrate, we're creating the foundation of healing that created the problem in the first place.
Which is just amazing, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And again, it becomes this self-fulfilling thing. So people who are stressed, anxious don't tend to play very much. And then you play more, you find what you like, you find what the child likes. Cause that's what I'll ask people. It's like, what did you do for fun when you were like 10, 11, 12? I rode my bike. I played road hockey or whatever. It's like, do you have the option to do that stuff now? It's like, yeah, so do that, and find the child, find the connection. Stop rejecting the child because they hold your pain.
oh, this has been such an amazing chat. I
Actually,
didn't realize how much the time has gone. How can people get in contact with you if they want to know more about your work?
yeah, usually the anxiety MD, not the anxiety doctor, but the anxiety MD. It's my website, it's my Instagram. It's the best way to find me. I have a program for an online program that's very inexpensive. I think it's, like less than 100 pounds. And it takes you from this framework of anxiety is actually in your body, not your mind. There's a couple of meditations in the middle of it that help you find the anxiety in your body, find the alarm in your body. And there's something called the yoga nidra, which basically connects the adult and the child and connects your mind and your body. And then the last sort of module of that is how to keep this going. How your mind is going to try and sabotage you back into worry, and how you can sort of stay out of that and keep continuing this positive force in your system so that default mode network goes into something more positive than negative. And then there's my book, Anxiety RX, which has been out now for just under a year, actually. It's the second edition, and Penguin Random House has published it in the UK. And it's a longer book for sure, but I find that anxious people typically are very intelligent because they've gone to the worry gym, the thinking gym, since they've been 5. So they get very intelligent from doing that. So the book's a little bit longer. I am working on a shorter book, but I think the best way and the most time and cost efficient way would be to get the MBRX program. And because it's 2.5 hours long in total, and it basically, once you finish that program, you'll know more about anxiety than most psychiatrists do.
Amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
being such an amazing guest, so open. I love how you look at things. And yeah, it's just been such a great conversation. So
And
thank
congratulations to you for getting past, because I know that's one of the most difficult things to overcome. It's an eating disorder. So congratulations.
thank you. I really
You are more
appreciate
than
it.
welcome.
And thank you so much, listeners. It's been great having you here again today, and I'll see you all next week.